Ladies and gentlemen, sit down, grab some snacks, and get ready to have your mind blown, because you're watching the ups and downs of Nicolas Cage.
Yes, thank you, hello, and welcome to the ups and downs of Nicolas Cage, where every week we take a look at the best and the worst that Nicolas Cage has to offer. As always, I'm your host, Logan Monk, here to take you on this journey. And today is a Monday, which means we're looking at one of his better films. Today, we're looking at 2003's Matchstick Men. Matchstick Men was written by Ted and Nicholas Griffin and directed by Ridley Scott. On a budget of $62 million, it only made $65.6 million at the box office. The film follows two con artists, Nicolas Cage and Sam Rockwell, as they prepare to land a massive score against a very rich client. When unexpectedly, Nicolas Cage, who suffers from OCD in this film, finds out that he has a 14-year-old daughter, and once she shows up, his life is thrown into disarray. This film is incredible, really. I knew so little about it going in, and despite it being ranked as one of Nicolas Cage's greatest of all time, I found so little about it. It wasn't a huge release when it was released in 2003. It barely made any of its money back. And of his highest films, this was the first one that I hadn't heard about beforehand. So my expectations were really non-existent. I didn't know what to expect from it. But thankfully, I got a really good enjoyment out of this. The film follows Nicolas Cage's life through the mundane. The big long-term con that him and Sam Rockwell are planning takes a back seat to the lives of them. Like, each plot sort of takes a break for a bit and then continues down a new one. And it all works really well together because each plot gets more and more interesting. And it eventually culminates in a big climactic ending, and everything sort of makes sense. Despite it picking up like 7 or 8 different plots along the way, they all wrap up in a satisfying conclusion that really makes sense. The film really focuses more on the mundane aspects. Nicolas Cage, who suffers from OCD, goes through the same things every day. He wakes up, he goes to his con artist work, he goes to the grocery store, and then he goes home. And he goes through this each time, but like with the monotonous that usually happens, each time he picks something new up. He starts to flirt with the grocery store cashier a bit more. He gets more success at work. He realizes he needs to go to a therapist. And then eventually the big event where his daughter meets him for the first time is when it really throws a wrench into his whole plans. Like, he was doing the same thing over and over again, and this one little bump in the road creates big waves as it keeps doing the same process over and over again. He is able to control his OCD more. He's able to feel better about going to the therapist. He's able to make improvements on his life. And that's not what you expect from Ridley Scott to be doing. Because obviously his big work is like the whole Alien franchise and The Martian or the Robin Hood. This is such a divergence away from what he's known for. And it's really a shame that it didn't do great at the box office, because this is really an incredible film. It shows the impact that the smallest thing can have on the mundane life, and that the personal connections you make are more important than the bad stuff that's happening. Like, the good outweighs the bad, and that people who are able to experience that are better in their lives. Many people have praised Nicolas Cage's performances in this movie and Sam Rockwell's. And what I've read at the time is that Nicolas Cage was being considered for an Oscar for this film. It was never officially stated, he was never nominated for it, but there was rumors at the time that he may get an Oscar nomination for his role. And honestly, he really deserves it. He pulls off playing an obsessive compulsive incredibly well. He has the tics, he has the issues, and they're consistent throughout the film. It never feels like Hollywood always exaggerates issues to suit their needs. Like, Tourette's is different than movie Tourette's, and being a genius in real life is being different than a genius in a movie. Like, Hollywood always embellishes and exaggerates the characteristics of people in real life. But Nicolas Cage has a magnificent performance, and the OCD performance never seems outrageous. It seems realistic. And then the few times that it does sort of get over the top, it makes sense in the story because he's feeling emotional or something big is happening to him. The performance is absolutely incredible, and that's all I can say about the film without spoiling it. So after an ad break, it goes into the spoiler territory.
Interested in making your own podcast but not sure where to start? Anchor makes it easy. Anchor has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And best of all, it's free. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
So the film starts off with Nicolas Cage going to his work where he's a con artist with his protege, Frank. What they do is they sell overpriced water filtration systems and then contact the people they've conned, pretending to be federal agents in charge of finding scammers. That way they're able to con the people twice. We learn early on that Nicolas Cage has obsessive compulsive disorder and that he has to do things in patterns. Like, he has to open the door 3 times before he can actually leave it. He has to polish every surface in his house until it's completely free of dirt. And we learn that sometimes he doesn't take his medications, which makes him more susceptible to the light outside and seeing the dirt, which makes it harder for him to operate day to day. Frank eventually refers him to a psychiatrist that his aunt went to, and his psychiatrist tells him that he should reach out to his child, who would be 14 years old now, in order to help calm down his neurosis. He's unable to because he's nervous about it, so he has a psychiatrist call the daughter and have her meet him at a park. They meet at the park, and then they head to Nicolas Cage's house, and then they start bonding over stuff that Nicolas Cage doesn't want. She starts being interested in conning people. She is staying out late. She's doing stuff that goes against Nicolas Cage's rules. But then he realizes that him spending time with her, conning people, and just spending time together is helping with his OCD. The symptoms are going down. He's not showing as much repetitiveness that he usually shows. And this whole time, he and Frank are working this really long con on this businessman who has a ton of money. And the idea is that they give him $80,000 in British money, and then he gives them $80,000 in US dollars. And the eventual plan is to make him give them the $80,000 in British money, and then they give him a fake case of the money. They swap out the real and fake money. In practical terms, I believe it's called a pigeon drop. Nick Cage teaches his daughter about how to con. He helps her take $300 from this old lady, making her think that they found a $600 lottery ticket winner, when in fact it is fake. And eventually, after they bond even more closely, he introduces her to the long con that he and Frank are planning. She is going to be the distraction that will distract the businessman away from the business transaction, and so that Nicolas Cage can swap out the real money for the fake money. Nicolas Cage goes bowling with his daughter, and all of a sudden he gets a call from Frank, and he realizes that the day for the business deal that's going down between them has been moved up a day because the businessman's trip to the Cayman has been moved up a day. So he has to quickly employ his daughter to help with the drop-off, and everything is going perfectly fine. They make the deal, they're ready to leave, but then the businessman chases them down into a parking lot and starts attacking them. After a few-minute chase scene, they're able to escape from his grasp, and they meet up with Frank in a parking lot where they start arguing about some business deals. And then they find out that the daughter has an arrest record, so that makes them easier to be traced. Nicolas Cage starts hatching a plan in order to get her away from there safely. He's planning to send her back to her mother's and to lay low for a while. But when he gets to his house, the businessman is there with Frank, who's been beaten up, and the businessman has a gun pointed at them. He starts talking about how he's going to receive 50% of every scam that they pull for the next foreseeable future. And when they're arguing about how Nicolas Cage is going to get him the money that he owes him, the daughter goes to this pug statue that Nicolas Cage has, and inside of it we saw earlier that there was a gun and some money. She grabs the gun, aims at the businessman, and then after a brief altercation, she shoots him. He tells Frank to take her to a motel, and that if he doesn't return in a bit, that he should take her back to her mother's, and that Frank should also disappear somewhere south. He goes back inside of his house to dispose of the body, but when it's not there, he gets hit from behind. He wakes up in a hospital room with two detectives asking him where all of his money is. And then eventually he calls his therapist in and asks for help with his daughter. We saw a few times throughout the film that Nicolas Cage has a safety deposit box filled with money and filled with envelopes to make transactions with. And he wants to give her the PIN number to access it so that she can live a better life. And after Nicolas Cage passes out again from his concussion, he wakes up and notices something's not right. There's no one answering his calls, asking for help. He sees the door swing wildly and a bright light coming from outside, and he realizes that the hospital room is fake. It's actually in an abandoned warehouse where no one has been, and there's obviously not a hospital there. He escapes from there, and then he runs to his therapist's office and sees that his